Hello, Internet people, and welcome to The Nerdy Christian, a place where we discuss culture and media, Christian theology and scripture, and world affairs, history, geopolitics, all of those kinds of things, and the interplay of all three of those categories, okay? So today, I want to give you a little bit of a science lesson. I went in depth on genetics and just understanding how gender is reached, how our gender is developed in the womb. Because this whole situation with Iman Khalif happened, and a lot of Christians were insisting if she has XY chromosomes, she's a man. But it turns out, Christian, or non-Christian perhaps watching, that's not really how the development of gender biologically works. So, in this video, we dive into DSDs, the condition that the category of condition that Iman Khalif potentially has, a disorder of sex development. And we dive into how your gender is actually determined and why sometimes you can have situations where a Y chromosome, which carries the instructions for male bodily development, cannot successfully deliver those instructions, or they are not successfully received by the body to result in male bodily development. And in that situation, you have someone who, like Iman Khalif, if she is someone with XY chromosomes, which has not been confirmed yet, for sure, there's no proof has been given by the IBA, but if she is, then you have someone with XY chromosomes, but a female body. And for me, I think, as a Christian, the best way to determine one's gender is anatomy. I don't think we should get onto this whole, what are we going to start, like gender testing every child for their chromosomes and then make them transition to live life as a gender that doesn't match their body? Like, I don't know. That's just my perspective. But all of that to say, I did some deep dives on the science, summarized it all for you here in this clip from this live stream we had yesterday. So take a look and then let me know what you think. So, let's talk about the IBA's definition of male and female. You have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes. So many people got on my posts on Instagram this last week and are like, nope, he has XY chromosomes. We need to talk about DSDs. We need to educate Christians on genetics and on science and how this stuff works, okay? DSDs, differences in sex development, are a group of rare conditions involving genes, hormones, and reproductive organs, including genitals. It means a person's sex development is different to most other people's. Now, there are a few different DSDs, which this person, Iman Khalif, if she does have an XY chromosome, which are XY chromosomes, which we don't know, but if she does, there are a few different ones she could have that do not necessarily impart upon her a material, unfair physical advantage. She could have androgen insensitivity syndrome, where the body ignores androgens or is insensitive to them. So then it wouldn't even matter what her testosterone levels are because she can't benefit from testosterone in the same way as a man. And she would have a female body because if she has complete CAIS, because her body was never given the androgens to lead to the development of male parts, right? Even though she had XY chromosomes. Swyer syndrome, similarly, people with Swyer syndrome have female external parts and some female internal reproductive structures. These individuals usually have a uterus and fallopian tubes, but their gonads are not functional. Since when do Christians define gender as, hey, you know what, you can get pregnant, but you're a man? What? Because some of these people having a uterus and such can get pregnant. Now, they usually would need donated eggs or something, but still, they can carry a baby to term and birth it because they have a female body, despite having XY chromosomes. How does that work? I'm glad you asked. Let's listen to a doctor right here, and then 2 videos on the way that genetics contribute to, they usually determine sex, but do not define it because of the way genetics work. But first, let's hear out this doctor.
The difference between male and female and subsequent gender identity is as simple as having or not having an X chromosome. Then please stick around and watch this video to try and learn a little bit about this crazy controversy that's going on in the Olympic world. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Suter. My goal in this channel is to help teach you about the medical side of the sports world. I'm actually in Paris right now. I've been here for the Olympics the past week or so. You can see Paris outside my window there. It's been absolutely beautiful. But the biggest story the past couple days has been, of course, with women's boxing. The story, of course, is that this Algerian boxer, Iman Khalif, is identifying as a woman. She's in female women's boxing, but there's a lot of talk that people saying she's a male. She's had these previous disqualifications for having XY chromosomes and failed gender testing. And so why in the world are we letting a man compete in a woman's sport, especially boxing? This is going to be as simple as possible of an embryology or the study of how we grow and develop, genetics and physiology lesson, so I can try to open people's mind to some of these challenging discussion points. Our genes are the blueprint for how our body functions and is built and is made. We get one half of our genes from our mother and one half from our father. That means most humans will have two genes for sex. That can be either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. Now, typically a female sex will have an X and an X chromosome, and a male sex will have an X and a Y. The contents of those chromosomes are what determine how we are going to develop either into a female, talking about sex again, or a male, again, talking about sex. So classic female sex, XX, classic male sex, XY. Now, interestingly, whenever we are first conceived in the womb, we all start off and we have the potential for our sexual organs, our gonads, to be either female or male. The presence of specific genes on the Y chromosome differentiate that down a pathway to become male. So without that Y chromosome turning on the pathway to become male, everybody would go down the female path in terms of their sexual development. So if you have a normal functioning Y chromosome, that turns on the pathway to send you down to have male sexual characteristics, male genitalia, etc. That's the basic black and white kind of bread and butter of how things normally go. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of possible errors in not only the genetic composition, but also what happens from the downstream physiology standpoint. On that Y chromosome is a specific gene that turns on a lot of the testosterone, the androgen signaling pathways that form the gonads, the external and internal sexual characteristics. So we're talking about the external signs like breast gonads, etc., versus the internal genetics. With these differences or disorders of sexual differentiation, or DSD, the genetics are XY, so you have that Y chromosome that's trying to turn on the pathway to fully have those male characteristics, but there's abnormalities that don't give the normal male gonads, male hormone profiles. So what you are left with is a very convoluted, very complicated picture of varying degrees of both physiology from a hormone standpoint to external physical characteristics that are what we see when we look at somebody to make us think male or female in the traditional sense. Oftentimes with these athletes, that results in higher levels of testosterone that gives them more of this athletic advantage. But because they have any variety of all these different genetic enzymes, testosterone, hormonal dysregulations and abnormalities, they might not have the exact same external features or what we call phenotype that would make us classically think of somebody as male or female. This is not always a black and white thing. And these DSD syndromes, these disorders, are far more common than you would think. These are not like 1 in a million types of things. And if you think of an athletic population where any sort of physiologic advantage might make you rise to the top, there's actually probably a high number of these individuals that are high-level athletes because they have had that boost in their physiology. But it's no fault to them. I really encourage people to try and be open-minded and learn or read more about this because, again, it is not as simple as saying so-and-so has an X chromosome, so therefore they are male. There is a lot of potential ambiguity that is no fault to the athlete or that individual. To simplify the question of this Algerian boxer and say, well, she has a Y chromosome, so therefore she absolutely is male, it is not that simple. It is very, very complicated trying to determine the difference there when you get these DSD individuals. Different sports have different ways of managing this. Track and field has tried to look at some different testosterone levels where you have to be below a certain threshold to compete in certain events that they feel you have a high competitive advantage. But there's no consistency across the sports world in terms of how these athletes are managed and handled when it comes to a sport and differentiation that has been historically male and female. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not going to act like I know the answer for how you handle these athletes who, again, at no fault to their own, are in this really difficult situation. Think of putting yourself in that woman's shoes. I don't think necessarily that this Algerian boxer is trying to like deceive the system and just win gold medals, but think about being a child and having one of these known diagnosed differences in sexual differentiation syndromes where you don't look like your friends who are female or male. You feel different because of your hormone levels. How are you supposed to put those people in a box of purely male or female? Again, I don't know the solution. I don't know the answer, but I wish that we all had the intellectual maturity to not just see these headlines, not see the way somebody looks, and automatically assume that just because we are told they have a chromosome, they must be male or they must be female. It's a very, very complex situation. So the basics, you get one set of chromosomes for each parent. Classic males have an X and a Y, classic females have an X and an X. All of us start down the same pathway with potential to be either female or male from a sexual organ, sexual characteristic standpoint, but the presence of some genes on the Y chromosome send that classically down the pathway male. However, abnormalities in that Y chromosome, potentially an extra chromosome, I didn't even mention that, Klinefelter, where you can have more than just those 2 chromosomes, send us down these pathways where we have abnormal phenotype, meaning abnormal physical characteristics, and abnormal physiology that don't clearly put us in the male or female box. That's it for the video. I hope this was helpful. Again, I'm not really trying to take sides here. Like I said, I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to give you a little bit more unbiased thought behind all this so that we don't rush to make such harsh judgments and assumptions when we don't really know the full story. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
So I hope that helped you guys understand this a little bit better, is that you can have people born with XY chromosomes whose bodies do not, in whom those Y chromosomes don't properly send these signals to develop a male body, and you end up with someone who is genetically male. It's funny, actually, right here I have in the recommended like a video from Brett Cooper that says the thumbnail is biologically male, and that's just like a misnomer here, you guys, because these people with DSD, depending on their DSD condition, there are a wide variety of them, can be born genetically male with a female body. And that, I think, is what is just like introducing cognitive dissonance for Christians, because I think they want to be able to like just make these 2 binary things of like, which I would say gender is a binary, but they want to have it like XY man, XX woman, end of story, that's it. And that's just not the way that the science works. So let's hear more about how what is the play between the genetic gender and the rest of your biology, the body, like your body's gender, and then which gender would you say people should live into? Because I think people should live into their anatomical gender. But, and again, the full narrative here is I'm trying to talk about a way that I think Christians got hoodwinked by dark powers here, because they were uneducated or ignorant of certain ways that these things work, and they got primed by everything that happened at the Olympics before with the Last Supper controversy, and now we're easily swept into this outrage machine over Iman Khalif's situation without actually truly understanding it. I want to help you understand it so that we don't get hoodwinked by the enemy and duped into something that I'll show at the end has caused Christians to be perceived in a poor light. Okay.
The second reason why the mechanisms that determine sex cannot be used as the definition for sex is because random mutations or genetic errors can occur. Sometimes sex determination mechanisms result in a sex opposite of what you'd expect from the chromosomes. For example, in humans, 1 in 20,000 males are born with XX chromosomes, rather than the typical XY. This occurs when the SRY gene, the gene that triggers differentiation into a male, translocates onto an X chromosome during cell division in the father's sperm cells. When the fetus is conceived, they receive 2 X chromosomes, and 1 with the SRY gene. SRY then triggers a cascade of genes leading to male development, gonadal differentiation into testes, which then leads to the development of male internal and external genitalia. Though they cannot produce sperm, since this requires the AZF region from the Y chromosome, XX males are defined as male because they develop the body plan that produces sperm, determined by genetics. Defining this person as female simply because of the XX chromosomes would be absurd, because they develop the body plan that produces sperm, not eggs. Thus, because sex determination mechanisms vary across species and can result in genetic errors during development, they cannot be used as the definition for sex. It should now be clear that males and females are not defined by the mechanisms that develop them in the womb. They are defined by the body plans that produce either sperm or eggs. For humans, this is determined by genetics. Defining sex as this way does not mean sex is a spectrum or that one can change sex. Sex is determined at conception by the individual's genetic profile, developed in the womb and immutable. If we wish to ascertain the full picture of a person's sex, we must analyze their genetically determined body plan, the structures that produce and release either gamete type. Defining male and female with respect to gamete type is the only way forward for an accurate and consistent definition of sex.
So there's that perspective on this, and this same organization made another video about intersex, and I want to dive into that because they give a really good explanation here.
So, if neither variation of sex characteristics nor...
Also, it's worth noting that these videos, this one's 4 years ago, this other one's 1 year ago, these are not being made in response to this situation. This is a bigger conversation that Christians, I feel like, are coming to late because because of this outrage machine, like, this is something that it would be good for us to become aware of so that we don't equip people who want gender to be a spectrum to argue against us, and instead have our definitions down and properly get this. Because I have already seen some left-leaning reporting and different stuff point to, like, why this just shows that gender can't be binary, that it is a spectrum, and I'm just like, no, that's not the takeaway here. But Christians need to be equipped to properly respond to that.
Personal identity defines the category of sex, then how can we define it? The answer is simple. The category of biological sex is defined through what developmental pathway you went down for the production of either sperm or eggs, the two and only two gamete types. Gamete production is supported through what dominant gonadal tissue you have, testes or ovaries, in the respective reproductive structures, Wolffian or Müllerian. The differentiation and development of both the gonads and reproductive structures are determined through the action of two mechanisms. One, the function of the SRY gene, and two, the function of androgen receptors. While there are multiple pathways for sex differentiation and development, there are only two endpoints, male or female. If you have both a functional SRY gene and functional androgen receptors, you will almost always develop as a male. On the other hand, if you do not have both of these mechanisms working together, such as an absence of SRY or insensitive androgen receptors, then you will almost always develop as a female. In this way, biological sex is determined through a sequential coordination of mutually antagonistic mechanisms, which activate the primary sex pathway of development and block the opposite sex pathway.
I want to point out that it's been speculated by many that Iman Khalif may have Swyer syndrome or CAIS, and I can't speak for certain. I'm not a geneticist. I don't know the details of CIAS. Or no, I don't know the details of Swyer in terms of how it's caused, but I know CAIS, which we talked about here, that causes one's androgen receptors to be inert, not to work. So, according to this guy, who I would say seems pretty unbiased, 4 years ago, that would make Iman Khalif a biological woman. So stop calling her a him.
Thus, sex is binary, defined through the two gametes, sperm or egg. There is no third option. To understand this, let's look at how the process works in the womb. In early development, we all start out with two internal reproductive structures that will differentiate and develop based on the SRY gene and androgens. Around the 8th week of gestation, the presence or absence of the SRY gene differentiates the bipotential gonads into either male or female tissue. If SRY is present, the bipotential gonads form into testes. As the testes develop, they release hormones for the development of the male internal reproductive structure, Wolffian. As the male structure develops further and the testes release hormones, the female structure, Müllerian, disintegrates. On the other hand, if SRY is absent, the bipotential gonads form into ovaries. As the ovaries develop, there is no anti-Müllerian hormone present to block female development. Then, the Müllerian structure develops further, and the male structure, Wolffian, disintegrates. Thus, the SRY gene is the on-off switch which determines your gonadal differentiation, and therefore, your biological sex. So, what about intersex? Well, this is where things get more complicated, but the endpoint of male or female remains the same. Intersex is an umbrella term which represents more than 40+ medical conditions, each with their own specific developmental pathways. Such complexity will be explored later, but for now, all we need to know is that most individuals classified as intersex have typical gonadal differentiation into either testes or ovaries, and have typical Wolffian or Müllerian structures, and are therefore either male or female. So, if intersex individuals are males and females like everyone else, then why are they considered in between, ambiguous, or a third sex? The answer is due to the lack of knowledge about intersex. For instance, intersex females can have typical gonadal differentiation, but differences in development of their genitalia, such as a fused labia and enlarged clitoris, a condition known as congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And yet, they are still females because they have ovaries, a Müllerian structure, and no SRY gene. Consider another case, where gonadal differentiation and development are both atypical. Intersex females who have the SRY gene but lack functional androgen receptors will have female morphology, a condition known as complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. And
There
yet,
it is.
even though these individuals have the SRY gene, they lack functional androgen receptors, and the male pathway of development does not proceed. Thus, they are females. On the other hand, intersex males who have typical gonadal differentiation with differences in reproductive development can sometimes develop breast tissue and have smaller testes, a condition known as Klinefelters, which results in a duplicate of the X. And yet they are still males because they have testes, a Wolffian structure, the SRY gene, and functional androgen receptors. For more complex intersex conditions, a case-specific analysis of their developmental pathway is needed, a topic for a future video. But
All right, and that gets at it. Like, that is what Christians need to understand about why genetic gender, XX or XY, does not define someone's gender. It's not Iman Khalif, just because she does have XY chromosomes. If she does, because we haven't had that confirmed by any evidence, but if she does, that does not make her a man. She can still have a female body with a variety of different conditions that would allow for that. Okay? All right. I hope that was helpful. It's important, very important for us Christians to be informed on these kinds of things, especially when we're trying to say this is the science that defends this perspective, because I believe that gender is a binary, that we are male or female. And I believe that we should align for our whole lives with the gender that we are born as. And the problem is that us Christians somewhat discredit our stance when we say things like someone is biologically male when they have female anatomy, just because they're genetically male. Okay? I think we discredit ourselves a little bit and discredit our perspective, our religious perspective on gender and anatomy as assigned by God. Okay? That's just my perspective. You can disagree with me if you want. I will posit that if you think that someone is determined a male by having XY chromosomes, there could be people in the Bible that are referred to as women because they had female bodies that had XY chromosomes. And, that could be a thing. Could have happened. It's possible. Bible calls women off of one kind of criteria and men off of another kind of criteria. If we want to use modern different criteria, that's up to you. But anyways, I hope that this was informative and helps you at least think critically about the science and how we make the claims that we make.